following information is presented for discussion and educational purposes only and is not intended or provided as treatment information for any specific person or behavior. If you or a loved one is having behavioral difficulties, you are encouraged to seek professional consultation as soon as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 18 of Ask the Behavior Doctors. My name is Dr. Jacob Boney, and I'm here at Scottsdale Pediatric Behavioral Services in Scottsdale, Arizona. Today, our question is, Dr. Jake, how do I get my child to keep their clothes on? They are constantly trying to take their clothes off. Whenever we go out into public or whenever we're around certain people, they constantly are trying to take their clothes off. It's embarrassing. What do I do to help my kid keep their clothes on? Again, this is a very common concern. Many parents, it depends on the age of the child. Some of my patients, because I see patients through a wide range of cognitive and functioning levels. I see this occur in children, obviously, as young as 2, even younger than that in children all the way up until their early teens. So again, a common concern, but definitely similar types of treatment advice for both. So, parents, you got to analyze, why would your kid be more likely to take their clothes off? So number one, let's say cultural norms. I've been in 2 homes where some parents admit to me that, especially when nobody's at the home but the family, they choose to wear very few clothes at the home. I've been in many homes where parents kind of have a very loose policy about clothing in the house. So kids can have that modeled, they can have that learned quickly. If they very rarely see parents wear clothes, or if they very rarely see their siblings wear clothes, they're not going to see clothing as nearly important as you may expect them to. So that's something to pay attention to for sure. Having no clear signs or signals of when it is or is not appropriate to have clothes on or to take clothes off. Again, if it's modeled for children at home, even if it's not modeled, sometimes kids really just don't understand when it is or is not appropriate to take off their clothes. Especially children who have some kind of developmental delay or children who may not be as aware socially. They're not going to learn through those social learning opportunities as easily as some of their typical peers. So maybe your child's just not attuned to the environment. They're not attuned to the social and cultural norms of the setting. So they may just try and replicate the behavior they have at home, and they may take their clothes off. So parents, we want to start teaching children, especially as they become more verbal and able to comprehend and understand rules. Children should know, when should you keep your clothes on? When is it okay to take your clothes off? There are obvious places where it's not appropriate to take your clothes off. There are obvious places where it's okay to take your clothes off. Your children should know those rules. So especially if they're about 3, 4, 5, you should start teaching them those rules. Definitely by the time they're in school, they should know those basic rules. If they don't, you want to spend some time instructing your kids on those norms about where it is and is not appropriate to take off clothing. Sometimes kids have poor fitting clothes, or they have issues, sensory issues with like tags, certain types of fabric. They can have some kind of sensitive skin reaction to certain chemicals in clothing, certain detergents used. Sometimes that's not always obvious, and it takes a while, especially if your kid is not verbally functioning at a higher level. They may not be able to explain to you what's bothering them about their clothing. So you want to pay attention to their skin. You want to pay attention to any patterns that you see. If there's outfits that your child's constantly feeling like they're itching or attempting to take off, you're definitely going to want to pay attention to that. And you might want to limit exposure to those outfits or buy some kind of different clothing or fabric so that your kid's not as irritated by that. They may get significantly more or different types of attention when they're not wearing clothes. Some kids love a reaction. They love the attention. They love just, getting people to react to them. And obviously that's a lot easier typically when you're not wearing clothes, because you stand out a whole lot more when you have no clothes on. So sometimes kids can just really like that social reaction that they get, and that's enough to trigger and maintain that behavior across people and across environments. I want you to ask yourself these questions when kind of trying to figure out this problem. Are there certain settings where your child is more or less likely to take their clothes off. So let's say your child constantly goes to a family friend's house and they take their clothes off there. Maybe there's something that happened. Maybe there's something that was modeled for them. Maybe there's something that occurs. The reason I want you to ask about that setting thing is that there are patterns in certain settings that might trigger or maintain these kind of behaviors. And figuring out what those triggers are and obviously stopping or redirecting them would be an important part of trying to manage this behavior effectively. Are there certain people that trigger the behavior more or less? So some kids, let's say around mom, feel totally comfortable just taking off their clothes, doing their thing, running around wherever. However, if dad's there, maybe let's say dad's a little bit more strict or a little bit more stringent about, hey, when we're here, you keep your clothes on. Let's say they never take it on. Again, that person can kind of serve as that cue, that discriminative stimulus, right? That cue that's okay to do that behavior. And some people can serve as the opposite. That stop sign, that close sign, that's the cue that it's not okay to do that behavior. Are there types of clothing your child particularly likes or dislikes? Let's say your child loves superheroes, and let's say he's really proud of his superhero shirt. If they really like their clothing and are proud of it, and let's say they want to show it off, they're a lot less likely to take it off. However, if they dislike their clothing, if they're not, have no value attached to it, if they see it as annoying, restrictive, confining, they're much more likely to try and get out of it. So parents, I want to give you some ideas today, some specific recommendations of what to do to help your child keep their clothing on. So if your child really likes to have no clothes on, I want you to let them get their fill of running around appropriate environments with no clothing on. So let's say you've approved that the house is an okay place, especially when let's say the rule is when no guests are at home, that's okay to just wear your diaper or just wear underwear. That's fine, that's totally fine. As long as your child is conditioned consistently, that's the standard, that's the rule. Parents, you could even box the behavior in a little bit more. Let's say you can run around upstairs. The upstairs is kind of the kids' domain. You guys, when you're up there, you are totally allowed to wear whatever you wear. But when you come down in the living room and when you come down in the kitchen, especially where guests could be, I want you guys to be wearing clothing at all times. So parents, it's about being clear and it's about being consistent. And you have to enforce those rules consistently. You also have to model those rules appropriately. So again, let's say parents, mom, let's say you walk around in your pajamas, or dad, you walk around in your underwear downstairs. Well, it's going to be a whole lot harder to have credibility and a whole lot harder to model that appropriate behavior if you're not maintaining the same standards that you're trying to have your child meet. So definitely, if you make that the rule, everybody needs to follow that rule and consistently demonstrate compliance with that. Keep the behavior in certain settings with certain scenarios. Again, like I said, just talking about maybe keeping it upstairs. Your child needs to know when it is or is not appropriate to keep their clothes on and take their clothes off. Obviously, for a young child who doesn't speak or doesn't understand, that's going to be impossible to communicate. But for children that are older, that are more verbal, or that understand basic explanations, I should be able to ask them, hey, when is it okay to take your clothes off? When are you supposed to keep your clothes on? And your child should be able to tell you those things. So again, parents, you want to create those really clear standards, those really clear signals, and those really clear expectations about when you need to keep clothes on and when it's okay to take clothes off. If your child takes their clothes off several times a day, there is a strategy. The nerdy terminology of it is called non-contingent reinforcement. Basically, you give the behavior away for free, or the reinforcer away for free, without making your child engage in the behavior. So let's say I'm watching your child at your home. And let's say I observe that on an average day, they take their clothes off 5 times in a day. And let's say I watch your child for 8 hours. So let's say that's roughly a little bit over every hour and 20 minutes. So what I want to do is, let's say every hour or every hour and 15 minutes, I want to just say, okay, it's time to take our clothes off. All right, let's run around. I'll let you run around for 15 minutes with no clothes, and then we'll put them back on. What you're doing is you're giving that reinforcer of not having clothes on, you're giving it away for free, and you're breaking that behavior chain. You're breaking the need for your child to do the behavior, i.e. take their clothes off, disrobe, to get the reinforcer, which is just being naked and running around. So by doing that, again, you break that behavior chain, you break that cycle, you eliminate the need for your child to disrobe, to have that sensation or to have that reinforcer of taking their clothes off. The nice thing about this, parents, is if you're really strategic about it, you can start to shape and fade that time. You can shape up the time your child keeps their clothes on. So let's say you start at an hour and 15 minutes. You could go to an hour and a half, an hour and 45, 2 hours and 15 minutes, every 3 hours, every 3.5 hours. Again, you never want to move up by more than about 20% increments. But parents, you can systematically shape your child's tolerance for keeping their clothes on by using this little non-contingent reinforcement intervention. Again, you basically want to take a baseline, see how many times your child does it, and then go to about 80% of that baseline, and that's your starting point. Okay, so if your child keeps their clothes on for 100 minutes at a time, you'd want to, at every 80 minutes, then start letting them take their clothes off for a few minutes, putting them back on, and then, like I said, shaping up from there. Analyze the reason your child takes their clothes off. Obviously, if you do this in a functional way, you're gonna get a more efficient result much quicker. Okay, so this is what I mean. If your child hates their clothes, let's say they are tight, they're restrictive, they're itchy, they just don't feel good to your child. The only way you're gonna get your child to keep their clothes on is to alter that sensation. The way you're gonna alter that sensation is you're probably gonna have to get some kind of new clothing, maybe tagless clothing. You can get special type of fabric. You can use certain types of detergents, certain types of laundry sheets. There's all kinds of things you can modify about the sensory experience of clothing. You could get looser clothing. You could get tighter clothing. You can have your child try on certain types of things. Let's say you just buy samples of certain type of clothing, and if your child seems to like it, then you can go buy a whole bunch more of that type of clothing. Parents, sometimes it's an experimental process. Sometimes it's really hard to figure out exactly sensory-wise what's going on with your child, but you need to change that sensory experience to make it more likely that your child's going to keep those clothes on. Alternatively, let's say your child does it for attention. Some kids love that attention. They love that response. And that's one of the best ways they know of. I've had a little girl in kindergarten before who loved to get attention. And when we put basic behaviors on extinction, she would engage in outrageous disrobing behaviors. And she would put on a full production. And she would make it very obvious that she wanted you to look at her and wanted a reaction from you. So again, I have seen this in children many, many times before. So parents, with that, we obviously, number one, want to teach the child appropriate attention-seeking behaviors. We want to teach them how to ask for it, how to request it, and we want to teach them appropriate ways and places to get attention. Disrobing is certainly not a long-term sustainable solution to get people's attention. Again, when the child is older, that becomes much less socially acceptable, much less appropriate in very few settings to do that. So we need to give them options that are more sustainable, more appropriate in multiple settings. But if they are doing it for attention, obviously you're not going to want to give very little attention for disrobing, and you're going to want to make it clear that the child will not get your attention until those clothes are put back on. And you can explain that to your child. And every time they do disrobe, you're obviously going to bring them in an environment, limit that amount of attention. You're going to put those clothes back on. You're going to let them know, hey, every time you take your clothes off, I'm just going to have to bring you back to this setting, and we're going to have to put them right back on. There's no use. What you're doing is that's called escape extinction. You're putting that behavior on extinction, but differentially reinforcing it with that attention. You're saying, I'll give you that attention as soon as you are clothed, because this is the best way to get attention. This is how healthy little children should get it out in public. They should be clothed. One thing I like to do too is, let's say your child continues or continuously does take their clothes off. Some parents like to use like a timeout intervention. And if it is attention maintained, that can be effective, okay? However, if it's not attention maintained, if it's escape maintained, or if it's multiply maintained by different types of things like escape to tangibles, or has kind of a multiple function to it. What I like, again, I go back to my performance-based consequences. So if I had a child that continuously kept taking their clothes off, what I would do is I would bring them back, put their clothes on, and make them keep their clothes on for a continuous amount of time. And what I would do is successively increase that time interval for each time they took their clothes off. So for example, let's say little Johnny has taken his clothes off, twice already. You've put them back on, and you said, that's it. If you want to watch TV, you need to keep your clothes on for at least 10 minutes. As soon as you keep your clothes on for 10 minutes, mom will turn that TV right back on. As soon as that 10 minutes goes, bam, you let Johnny watch that TV. Let's say Johnny takes his clothes off again. All right, buddy, you know what? Now I need you to keep your clothes on for 20 minutes. You probably don't want to increase those intervals any more than 20 to 50% at a time, probably staying closer to that 20%. But the reason you do that is you make keeping clothes on the only behavior that will result in access to preferred reinforcers. You make that the preferred behavior. Basically, you're making your child engage in the positive behavior to earn access to everything they want. The opposite thing, or the worst thing to do, would say, all right, that's it, you're grounded, you keep taking your clothes off. Well, what can you pretty much guarantee? That your child's not going to be motivated to keep their clothes on, and that they're probably going to continue taking their clothes off. Remember, you need to make it important that your child keep their clothes on. The best way to make that behavior important is to make that behavior pay and to make that behavior result in consistent, constant access to the things they like and enjoy. If your child is too small to talk, too young to understand, or let's say they're lower cognitive functioning or have some type of delay that prevents them from really understanding or comprehending, what you may want to do is you may want to buy clothing that is more difficult to take off. Obviously, a classic solution is to put a onesie, put it on backwards. Put all the snaps, all the zippers behind the child so that they can't zip it up. Believe it or not, go on a Google search, type in baby clothes that are hard to take off or clothing for children that is hard to take off. You will find tons of solutions. There's all kinds of shirts that tuck in, zip, that attach to underpants. There are all kinds of clothing, harnesses, belts, buckles, zippers, snaps, everything you can imagine that would make it more difficult for your child to take off. Now remember, we want to be humane. We want to allow the child option to be able to take off their clothing. We don't want to keep them in dirty clothing all day. We want to find that balance. But again, this is a great solution for small children, for lower functioning children. It serves as a good physical barrier that makes it much more difficult to take that clothing off. So parents, we gave you some ideas today for how to help your kids keep their clothes on. We want to thank you for joining us here at Ask the Behavior Doctors. We want to encourage you to continue submitting those questions to us at info@scottsdalepbs.com. We want to thank our photographer, Mr. Philip Carnevale of Philip Carnevale Photography. And we want to encourage you to join us again next week for episode 19 of Ask the Behavior Doctors. And we thank you very much.